The dust-coated window of the Wells Fargo office in Durango, Colorado, rattled as Winona Tucker slammed a fist against the counter, her face flushed with anger beneath her wide-brimmed hat. 3 months I've waited for that money transfer from my brother in Boston, Mr. Phillips. 3 months of broken promises from a man who swore he'd never leave me stranded. Her voice cracked slightly as she swept a stray copper curl behind her ear, the late summer of 1883 beating down mercilessly outside. Behind the counter, the balding clerk adjusted his spectacles nervously. "I'm truly sorry, Miss Tucker, but there's nothing more I can do. The stagecoach routes have been plagued with robberies, and I'm supposed to lose the ranch because of it," Winona interrupted, her green eyes flashing. 22 years old and already fighting to keep the only home she had left after her father's passing last winter. The drought had been cruel to their cattle, and without the promised funds, foreclosure loomed just days away. The commotion drew the attention of a tall figure leaning against the doorframe, his face shadowed by a well-worn Stetson. Winona had noticed him when she'd entered difficult not to with his imposing presence, but had been too focused on her mission to pay him much mind. "Troubles with promises, madam." His voice was deep, carrying a slight southern drawl that immediately identified him as not from these parts. Winona turned, ready to dismiss the stranger's intrusion, but found herself momentarily silenced by the intensity of his blue eyes as he stepped into the light. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's stubble. His clothes were trail-worn but clean denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a leather vest that had seen better days. The gun at his hip wasn't flashy, just functional, much like the man himself. "Nothing that concerns you, mister," she replied coolly, gathering her dignity despite the desperation clawing at her insides. "Forgive me for overhearing." He touched the brim of his hat politely. "I'm Forrest Tanner, just rode into town looking for work." "Well, Mr. Tanner, unless you can conjure up $300 by Friday, I doubt you can help with my problems." She turned to leave but halted when he spoke again. "I heard you mention someone broke their promises to you." She glanced back over her shoulder, studying him with wary curiosity. "My brother. He made promises he couldn't keep, and now I stand to lose everything my father built." Forrest stepped closer, his spurs making a gentle jingling sound against the wooden floor. "Where I come from, a man's word is his bond." He held her gaze steadily. "If your brother broke every promise, perhaps you need someone who'll keep every one he couldn't." A disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. "And that would be you, a stranger I've known all of 2 minutes." "Madam, I've been a lot of things in my 30 years, a soldier, a rancher, a drifter, but never a man who breaks his word." He extended a calloused hand. "Let me help." Winona stared at that outstretched hand, torn between pride and desperation. "And what would you want in return, Mr. Tanner?" "I've met enough men to know nothing comes without a price. A fair wage for honest work." He shrugged. "I hear you've got a ranch needing attention." Something in his straightforward manner made Winona reconsider her initial judgment. With a deep breath, she made a decision that would change everything. "Tucker Creek Ranch, 3 miles east of town. If you're serious, be there at sunrise tomorrow." Without waiting for his response, she turned and strode out of the office, leaving a cloud of dust and determination in her wake. Forrest watched her go, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I'll be there," he murmured, though she was already gone. The following dawn painted the Colorado sky in breathtaking strokes of gold and crimson as Forrest rode through the open gate of Tucker Creek Ranch. The property had clearly seen better days. Fencing sagged in multiple places, the barn roof needed repairs, and the cattle in the nearest pasture looked thin. But the main house stood proud, a two-story structure of solid timber that spoke of careful craftsmanship and better times. As he dismounted in the yard, the front door swung open. Winona emerged wearing a simple work dress and boots, her copper hair braided and hanging over one shoulder. She looked surprised, as if she hadn't truly expected him to appear. "You came," she stated simply, descending the porch steps. Forrest removed his hat. "Said I would, didn't I?" She studied him in the clear morning light, taking in details she'd missed yesterday: a thin scar above his right eyebrow, the way he stood with his weight balanced evenly as if always ready for whatever might come. "I still don't know if I can pay you," she admitted. "Not until if my brother's money arrives. Tell me what needs doing and we'll sort the rest later." Forrest led his horse toward the water trough. "I'm good with my hands and I know cattle. That's a start." For the first time, Winona's expression softened slightly. "It's more than I had yesterday." She gave him a brief tour of the property, outlining the most urgent tasks: mending fences, checking the remaining cattle, fixing the leaky barn roof before autumn brought rain. As they walked, she shared snippets of the ranch's history, how her father had built it from nothing 20 years ago, and how her brother William had left for Boston to seek his fortune when she was just 16. "He sends letters filled with promises," she explained as they inspected a broken section of fencing. "Money that never arrives, visits he never makes. After Father died, he swore he'd send enough to save the ranch. I was fool enough to believe him." Forrest listened quietly, taking in both her words and the land around them. "Family can be complicated," he offered finally. "Sometimes people make promises they truly intend to keep at the time." She shot him a sharp look. "That doesn't help when the bank is days away from claiming everything." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. "But dwelling on broken promises won't fix your fences. Let's start there." By midday, they had repaired the most critical breaks in the north pasture fence. Winona worked alongside him without complaint, her hands just as calloused as his own. She was stronger than she looked, and far more knowledgeable about ranching than many men he'd known. As they paused for a simple meal of bread and jerky in the shade of an old oak tree, Forrest ventured to ask, "How many cattle do you have left?" 28, she answered, taking a sip from her canteen. "Had nearly 100 before the drought hit. Father sold some to keep us going, then more died from lack of water and decent grazing. The rest—" She hesitated. "Some went missing. I suspect the Rayburn brothers from the next county, but can't prove it. Cattle rustlers," she nodded grimly. "They've been eyeing this land for years. With Father gone, they must think I'm easy prey. And the sheriff," a bitter smile crossed her face. "Sheriff Donovan is conveniently blind to anything the Rayburns do. They have money, and he likes to drink more than he likes to work." Forrest considered this information carefully. 28 head won't bring much at auction, even if we get them properly fattened." "I know that." Frustration edged her voice. "That's why I need my brother's money. Without it—" She didn't finish the sentence. "How much time do we have before the bank acts?" 3 days. "Unless I can pay at least half of what's owed, they'll start foreclosure proceedings." Forrest fell silent, his mind working through possibilities as he absently stroked the neck of his horse, which had wandered over to investigate their rest break. "There's a cattle auction in Silver Springs tomorrow," he said finally. "If we leave at first light, we could make it." Winona looked at him incredulously. "Silver Springs is 30 miles away, and I just told you my cattle aren't in selling condition." "Not to sell," he clarified, "to buy." "With what money?" she laughed, the sound lacking any humor. "Did you miss the part where I'm broke?" "I have some savings," Forrest admitted. "Not $300, but enough to buy a few good beeves if the prices are fair. Fatten them quick, breed them with your stock, and you'd have something worth building on." She stared at him, confusion evident in her expression. "Why would you invest your savings in my failing ranch? You don't know me." "Consider it an advance on my wages," he replied with a shrug. "I need work, you need help. Sometimes solutions are simpler than people make them." "Or you're a fool," she countered, though without malice. He grinned unexpectedly, transforming his serious face. "Wouldn't be the first time I've been called that, but I'm a fool who keeps his word." That evening, as darkness settled over Tucker Creek Ranch, they sat on the porch after a simple dinner of beans and cornbread that Winona had prepared. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant pine, while cicadas sang their endless summer song. "Tell me about yourself, Mr. Tanner," Winona said, breaking a comfortable silence. "A man doesn't just appear at the right moment with the right skills without a story behind him." Forrest leaned back in his chair, gazing up at the star-scattered sky. "Not much to tell that's worth hearing. Grew up in Tennessee, fought for the Union in the war when I was barely 18. Came west afterward, worked ranches from Texas to Montana. Family," a brief shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents to fever before the war. Had a wife once in Wyoming Territory. She died in childbirth along with our son 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Winona said softly. He acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. After that, staying in one place didn't seem to matter much. "Been drifting since, taking work where I find it." "Until now," she observed. "Until now," he agreed, meeting her gaze in the dim light spilling from the window. "What about you?" "Always lived here, born and raised on this land," she confirmed. "Mother died when I was 10. It was just father, William, and me until William left for the East. He had bigger dreams than cattle and dust." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. "He promised to send for me once he was established, but that promise faded like so many others. And you never wanted to leave yourself." "See other places." Winona was quiet for a long moment. "I thought about it, even packed a bag once after an argument with father, but this land." She gestured to the darkened landscape around them. "It gets in your blood. These mountains, this valley, it's part of me." Forrest nodded in understanding. He'd seen that same connection in other ranchers over the years, that bone-deep belonging to a piece of earth that defied rational explanation. "We should get some rest," Winona finally said, rising from her chair. "It's a long ride to Silver Springs tomorrow." Before retreating to the barn where she'd offered him to sleep, Forrest paused at the porch steps. "Miss Tucker, I hope you don't mind me asking, but that money from your brother, are you certain it's coming at all?" Her face tightened in the lamplight. "It has to," she answered simply, then disappeared into the house. The journey to Silver Springs began in the gray light before sunrise. They rode side by side, leading an extra horse for any purchases they might make. The terrain gradually changed from the open ranch lands around Durango to rougher country, requiring them to navigate narrow trails that wound through stands of aspen and pine. As they rode, Winona gradually revealed more about the ranch's challenges: the mortgage her father had taken out 3 years ago to expand their operation, the investments that had soured when the drought came, the slow decline that had accelerated after his death from pneumonia last winter. "Father was too proud to tell William how bad things had gotten," she explained as they paused to rest the horses by a creek. "And I couldn't bring myself to write about his death until 2 months after it happened." Her voice grew quieter. "I suppose I thought if I didn't put it in words, it somehow wouldn't be real." Forrest handed her a canteen. "Grief does strange things to people." She took a long drink before continuing. "When I finally wrote, William responded immediately. He seemed genuinely devastated and promised to send enough money to clear the debt. Said he'd made some profitable investments and could easily help." Her expression hardened. The first transfer was supposed to arrive in June. It's now September. Have you had any word since then? Letters full of excuses and fresh promises. The money was sent but must have been delayed. The bank made an error. He'll send more next month. She shook her head. I've stopped believing any of it. They reached Silver Springs by mid-afternoon, a larger town than Durango with a proper train station and more substantial businesses lining its main street. The auction was already underway at the stockyards on the edge of town, drawing ranchers and buyers from across the region. As they tied their horses at the hitching post, Forrest noticed Winona nervously adjusting her hat and smoothing her riding skirt. "Something wrong?" he asked. "It's been a while since I've been to town," she admitted. "Father usually handled the auctions and business matters." "Well, today you're a rancher here to evaluate stock," he said with reassuring confidence. "Nothing more, nothing less." She straightened her shoulders, a determined look replacing the momentary uncertainty. "You're right, let's go." The auction yard was crowded with men in various states of trail dust and prosperity, their conversations creating a constant background rumble, punctuated by the auctioneer's rapid-fire delivery and the lowing of cattle. More than a few curious glances followed Winona as they made their way through the throng, but Forrest's imposing presence at her side seemed to discourage any unwelcome comments. They spent an hour carefully assessing the available stock. Forrest's expertise proved invaluable as he pointed out animals with good breeding potential versus those that merely looked healthy but carried hidden issues. "That red heifer," he murmured, nodding toward a young cow being led into the auction ring. "Good bone structure, clear eyes. She's thin but not from illness, just needs proper feed." Winona studied the animal with an appraising eye. "You're right, and she looks like she could be bred soon." "Exactly." He smiled, clearly pleased by her assessment. When the bidding started, Forrest was methodical, never allowing himself to be drawn into the competitive fervor that sometimes drove prices higher than an animal's worth. By late afternoon, they had secured 3 quality heifers and a young bull for a reasonable sum, though it clearly represented most of Forrest's savings. As they prepared to leave town with their purchases, Winona insisted on stopping at the telegraph office. "I need to send one more message to William," she explained. "He should know what's happening." While she wrote her telegram, Forrest stepped into the general store to purchase supplies for the return journey. He was selecting coffee when a conversation near the counter caught his attention. "Tucker Place will be up for auction next week, from what I hear," a heavy-set man in an expensive suit was saying to the shopkeeper. "Rayburn already has plans for that water access." "Shame about old Tucker's girl," the shopkeeper replied, lowering his voice. "Pretty little thing to end up with nothing. Rayburn might offer her a position in his household," the first man chuckled with obvious insinuation. "He's always had an eye for redheads." Forrest's hand tightened around the coffee tin, a cold anger settling in his chest. He placed his purchases on the counter with deliberate calm, interrupting their conversation. "Gentlemen," he said with deceptive pleasantness, "you might want to revise your expectations about the Tucker Ranch. It's not changing hands anytime soon." The suit-wearing man, clearly a banker or lawyer by his dress, looked Forrest up and down with thinly veiled disdain. "And you would know this how, exactly?" "Because I'm working for Miss Tucker now," Forrest replied evenly. "And I don't appreciate hearing her discussed in such terms." "Another drifter thinking he can save a failing ranch," the man laughed, looking to the shopkeeper for appreciation of his wit. "The bank doesn't care who works the land, friend, only that its debts are paid." Forrest paid for his supplies, maintaining his composure despite the urge to teach the man some manners. Just passing along some friendly advice. Miss Tucker has more resources than you might think." Outside, he found Winona waiting by the horses, her expression tight with unspoken thoughts. "Any response to your telegram?" he asked, securing their supplies to the saddle. She shook her head. "It will take time if he answers at all." She glanced at the new cattle, which were secured to the lead rope of the third horse. "I should thank you for this investment in a ranch you barely know." "The cattle are sound. It's a good investment regardless," he assured her, helping her mount her horse. "Did anyone at the telegraph office recognize you?" "No, why?" He hesitated, then decided honesty was necessary. "There's talk in town about your ranch foreclosure. Seems someone named Rayburn is already planning what to do with your land." Winona's face flushed with anger. "Victor Rayburn," she spat the name. "He's been trying to get our water rights for years. Father always said he was the type of man who'd steal the coins from a dead man's eyes." "Then we'd better make sure he doesn't get the chance," Forrest replied grimly. "Let's head back. I don't like the idea of your place sitting unguarded overnight." They rode out of Silver Springs as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains. To save time, Forrest suggested a different route home, a trail he'd noticed on maps that cut through the foothills, rather than following the longer valley road. The path narrowed as they climbed into more rugged terrain, forcing them to ride single file. The new cattle followed docilely, though the pace was necessarily slower than their journey to town. As dusk approached, Forrest began looking for a suitable place to make camp for the night. "There's a clearing ahead with a spring," Winona called from behind him. "Father and I camped there sometimes when working the north pastures." The site proved ideal, a small meadow nestled among pines, with sweet water bubbling from rocks at one end. They worked together with the efficiency of longtime partners, Forrest gathering firewood while Winona secured the horses and cattle with access to both water and grazing. As darkness fell completely, they sat beside the small fire Forrest had built, sharing a simple meal of jerky, biscuits, and coffee. The night was clear but cool, with countless stars scattered across the black canvas of the sky. "I've been thinking," Forrest said after they had eaten. "Even with these new cattle, you'll need more immediate income to satisfy the bank." Winona poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I know. Unless William's money miraculously appears tomorrow, I'll still be short. There are other possibilities." He leaned forward, his face serious in the firelight. "The stream on your property, it runs year-round," she nodded. "Even during the worst drought, it never dried up completely. That's why Rayburn wants it so badly. And that stretch of pine forest on the north boundary, it's part of your deed." "Yes, about 40 acres of good timber." Forrest nodded thoughtfully. "The sawmill in Durango would pay well for selective cutting rights. Not clear cutting, just the mature trees. It would provide immediate cash without damaging the land's value." Winona considered this idea. "Father always refused to cut any trees, said they were our windbreak and should be preserved." "He wasn't wrong about their value," Forrest acknowledged. "But sometimes you have to sacrifice one asset to save the whole. The forest will regrow." "I'll think about it," she said finally. Though arranging it in one day seems impossible. "The owner of the sawmill, Jenkins, was at the auction today. I could speak with him when we return." Winona studied him curiously across the fire. "You seem very invested in saving my ranch, Mr. Tanner." "Forrest," he corrected gently. "And yes, I suppose I am." "Why?" The directness of her question hung in the night air between them. He took his time answering, choosing his words carefully. "I've spent 5 years drifting, taking jobs that meant nothing beyond the next meal or place to sleep. Your land, Your determination to fight for it reminds me there are things worth staying for." He met her gaze steadily. "Worth fighting for." Something shifted in Winona's expression, a softening around her eyes that transformed her face. For a moment, she looked younger, unburdened by the weight of her struggles. "I still don't understand why you're helping a stranger," she said quietly. "Maybe I'm tired of being a stranger everywhere I go," he replied with simple honesty. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling fire and the occasional soft sounds of the horses. Eventually, Winona rose to check on the cattle one last time before sleep, while Forrest prepared their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire. As they settled in for the night, Winona's voice came softly through the darkness. "Thank you, Forrest, not just for the cattle or the ideas about the timber, but for giving me hope when I'd lost it." "Get some rest," he answered gently. "Tomorrow we start keeping promises." Morning brought a chill mist that clung to the meadow, turning the world into a dreamy landscape of gray and silver. They broke camp efficiently, speaking little as they prepared the animals for the journey home. Something had changed between them during the night, a tentative trust beginning to take root. They had been riding for perhaps 2 hours when Forrest, in the lead, suddenly raised his hand in a signal to stop. Winona drew her horse alongside his, following his gaze to the trail ahead where it curved around a rocky outcropping. "What is it?" she whispered. "Fresh hoofprints," he murmured. "At least 3 riders waiting around that bend. Could be travelers like us." "Could be," he agreed, though his expression remained doubtful. "But they came from the direction of your ranch and stopped here instead of continuing on. That suggests they're waiting for something. Or someone," his tone implied. Winona's hand moved instinctively to the rifle secured to her saddle. "The Rayburns, possibly. Anyone else who might wish you harm," she shook her head slowly. "Not that I know of." Forrest considered their options, studying the terrain around them. "There's a game trail to our right that looks like it might loop around this section. It'll be slower going, but safer if those men have ill intentions." They carefully guided their small herd onto the narrower path, moving deeper into the trees to avoid detection. The trail was indeed challenging, forcing them to duck beneath low branches and navigate around fallen logs. After nearly an hour of slow progress, the path rejoined the main trail well past the ambush point. Forrest scouted ahead briefly before signaling Winona to continue. "No sign of them," he reported as they resumed their journey. "They either gave up waiting or took a different route." "Why would anyone be lying in wait for us?" Winona wondered aloud. "New cattle represent an investment," Forrest pointed out. "Someone who wants your land to fail might not appreciate that. You think Rayburn would steal our cattle in broad daylight? I think a man who's counting on foreclosure might get desperate when his plans are threatened." They pushed on with greater urgency, both feeling the need to reach the safety of Tucker Creek Ranch. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the property in the late afternoon, Winona gasped. Smoke rose from behind the main house. Without hesitation, they spurred their horses forward, leaving the newly purchased cattle secured hastily to a sturdy tree. As they thundered into the ranch yard, they discovered the source of the smoke. The small barn was ablaze, flames already consuming the roof and licking hungrily at the wooden walls. 2 ranch hands from the neighboring property, alerted by the smoke, had arrived just before them and were frantically working to prevent the fire from spreading to the house. Winona leapt from her horse and raced to help, forming a bucket line from the well to the flames. For the next hour, they battled the fire with grim determination. By the time they finally subdued it, the barn was more than half destroyed, though they had managed to save the adjoining structures. Soot-covered and exhausted, Winona stared at the smoldering ruins with despair evident in every line of her body. "All the feed," she said hollowly. "The spare tack tools, seed for spring planting. Everything we needed." Forrest placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Was anyone hurt?" She shook her head, then turned to thank the neighbors who had helped. Once they had departed, promising to return the next day to assist with cleanup, Winona sank onto the porch steps, her face a mask of weariness. "This wasn't an accident," Forrest said quietly, sitting beside her. "No," she agreed. "The lamp was nowhere near the hay store, and I always check it before leaving." Her fingers clenched into fists in her lap. "Rayburn." "Most likely," Forrest concurred. "The men we avoided on the trail probably came from here. What am I supposed to do now?" The defeated tone in her voice cut through him more sharply than any blade. "Even if we sell timber rights, I can't rebuild everything in time." Forrest was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ruins of the barn as the last wisps of smoke curled skyward. "We go to the sheriff," he said finally. A bitter laugh escaped her. "Sheriff Donovan, he'll do nothing. Perhaps, but we make an official complaint regardless, establish a record." His voice hardened with resolve. "And then we pay Mr. Rayburn a visit. To do what?" She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "You can't just confront a man like that. He has money, connections, hired guns." "I don't plan to fight him," Forrest assured her. "Just to deliver a message." "What message?" A dangerous smile touched his lips briefly. "That Tucker Creek Ranch isn't as defenseless as he thinks." He stood, offering her his hand. "But first, let's retrieve our new cattle and get them settled. Tomorrow will be soon enough for battles." That night, after securing the new animals in the undamaged corral and salvaging what they could from the barn ruins, they sat at Winona's kitchen table making plans. Despite the setback of the fire, Forrest remained determinedly optimistic, outlining steps to approach both the bank and the sawmill owner. "Jenkins is a reasonable man," he explained as they shared a simple stew Winona had prepared. "If we explain the situation, he might agree to an advance payment for future timber rights." "And if he doesn't?" she asked, pushing her barely touched food around her plate. "Then we try something else," Forrest replied with simple determination. "There's always another way forward." Winona studied him across the table, lamplight casting warm shadows across his features. "You truly never give up, do you? Not when something matters." He met her gaze directly. She looked away first, suddenly self-conscious under the intensity of his blue eyes. "I should check if there's been any reply to my telegram," she said, rising from the table. "The stage would have brought any messages to town today." "I'll ride in with you tomorrow," Forrest offered. "We can speak with the sheriff and Jenkins, then check for your brother's response." Later, as Winona prepared for bed in her upstairs room, she found herself pausing at the window that overlooked the ranch yard. In the silver wash of moonlight, she could see Forrest's tall figure moving among the new cattle, checking them one final time before retiring to the small bunkhouse where he'd moved his belongings after the barn fire. His steadfast presence over just these few days had changed something fundamental about Tucker Creek Ranch. Where before there had been only the heavy silence of impending loss, now there was activity, planning, purpose. For the first time since her father's death, Winona felt the faintest stirring of hope, and something else she wasn't quite ready to name. The following morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect Colorado autumn day that belied the tensions simmering beneath the surface. Forrest and Winona rode into Durango side by side, their conversation focused on the practical matters ahead. They agreed to split their errands. Forrest would visit the sawmill while Winona checked for telegrams, Then they would meet at the sheriff's office. The telegraph clerk had news, though not what Winona had hoped for. "Message came for you yesterday, Miss Tucker," he said, handing her a yellow slip of paper. "From Boston." Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it, eyes scanning the brief text. "Deeply regret delays. Stop business investments. Suffered unexpected losses. Stop unable to send promised funds at present. Stop. Will write with full explanation. Stop. Deepest apologies. Stop." William, the crushing finality of it stole her breath. After months of clinging to this last hope, it was gone in a few terse sentences. William had failed her again. There would be no miraculous rescue from her brother. She was still standing motionless outside the telegraph office when Forrest found her, the yellow paper clutched in her hand. One look at her face told him everything. "No money," she said flatly, handing him the telegram. He read it quickly, his expression darkening. "I'm sorry, Winona." "It doesn't matter," she replied with forced steadiness. "I knew this would happen. I just didn't want to believe it." She straightened her shoulders. "What news from Jenkins?" "He's interested," Forrest reported. "Said he'd ride out tomorrow to assess the timber himself. If it's as good as I described, he's prepared to make an immediate offer." A flicker of renewed hope crossed her face. "That's something, at least." "It is," he agreed, "but there's more." He hesitated before continuing. "I spoke with a banker I know from my time in Denver who's recently moved here. He suggested approaching the bank about renegotiating your loan terms, perhaps extending the deadline in exchange for a small immediate payment and timber rights as collateral." "You've been busy," she observed, a ghost of a smile touching her lips despite her distress. "No time to waste," he replied simply. "Shall we see the sheriff now?" Sheriff Donovan's office was at the far end of Durango's Main Street, a modest building that also housed the town's small jail. As they approached, a commotion outside drew their attention. 3 men were mounting horses, their laughter carrying across the street. Winona stiffened beside him. "The Rayburn brothers," she murmured. "Victor is the one in the black hat. His brothers Cole and Ezra follow him everywhere." Forrest studied the men with careful attention. Victor Rayburn was a large man with a florid face and an air of entitled arrogance. His brothers shared his broad build and confident bearing, though they lacked the calculated intelligence evident in Victor's gaze. All 3 were well armed and expensively dressed. Victor noticed them first, his conversation cutting off mid-sentence as his eyes landed on Winona. A slow smile spread across his face as he nudged his horse toward them. "Miss Tucker," he called out with exaggerated politeness. "What a pleasant surprise. I was just discussing your property with Sheriff Donovan." "I'm sure you were," Winona replied coldly. Victor's gaze shifted to Forrest, assessing him with open curiosity. "I don't believe we've met." "Forrest Tanner," he replied evenly, not offering his hand. "Ah, the new hired man I've heard about." Victor's tone managed to make the words sound like an insult. "It's admirable of you to assist Miss Tucker in these difficult times, but I fear you're both fighting a losing battle." "Is that why you felt the need to burn her barn?" Forrest asked quietly. The directness of the question caused a moment of startled silence. Victor recovered quickly, his expression hardening. "That's a serious accusation, stranger, one you'd be wise to reconsider." "It's not an accusation, merely a question," Forrest replied with dangerous calm. "Just like I'm wondering why your men were waiting to ambush us on the trail yesterday." Cole Rayburn, the younger brother, shifted uncomfortably in his saddle while Ezra's hand drifted toward his gun. Victor silenced them both with a sharp gesture. "I don't know what you're talking about," Victor said smoothly, "but accidents happen frequently on struggling ranches. Poor maintenance, overtaxed equipment. It's a hazardous life." It certainly is, Forrest agreed. Especially when neighbors get greedy. Victor's face darkened. I'd watch your words carefully, Tanner. You're new here and you don't understand how things work. I understand perfectly, Forrest countered. You want Tucker land and you're not particular about how you get it. Victor, Cole muttered warningly, eyeing the gathering crowd of onlookers. Victor forced a laugh. You misunderstand my interest, Tanner. I merely offered to purchase Miss Tucker's property at a fair price to save her the humiliation of foreclosure. A neighborly gesture. Your concern is touching, Winona interjected, her voice sharp with sarcasm. But Tucker Creek Ranch isn't for sale to you or anyone else. We'll see about that, Victor replied, his false joviality slipping. The bank has different ideas about your future, my dear. I suggest you start packing your belongings. With a tip of his hat, he wheeled his horse around. Good day to you both. As the Rayburns rode away, Forrest placed a steadying hand at Winona's elbow. Are you all right? I'm fine, she replied, though her voice trembled slightly. But I doubt Sheriff Donovan will be very receptive to our complaints now. We file them anyway, Forrest insisted. Create a record, even if it goes nowhere. As predicted, their meeting with the sheriff proved frustrating. A barrel-chested man with a drooping mustache and bloodshot eyes, Sheriff Donovan listened to their account of the barn fire with thinly veiled skepticism. No witnesses, no evidence of wrongdoing, he summarized dismissively. Could have been a spark from a lantern, mice chewing on matches, any number of things. The timing is rather convenient for Mr. Rayburn's interests, wouldn't you say? Forrest pressed. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Victor Rayburn is a respected businessman in this county, Tanner. You do well to remember that before throwing around accusations. Despite the sheriff's attitude, Forrest insisted on making a formal complaint about both the fire and the suspected ambush. Donovan reluctantly recorded their statements, making it clear he considered it a waste of time. As they left the office, Winona's frustration boiled over. This is exactly what I expected. Donovan's probably heading to Rayburn's ranch right now to warn him. Probably, Forrest agreed calmly. But we've established our position. Rayburn knows we're not simply rolling over. That might make him more dangerous, not less, she pointed out as they collected their horses from the hitching post. True, Forrest acknowledged, which is why we'll need to be prepared. The ride back to Tucker Creek Ranch was tense, both of them watchful of their surroundings. As they approached the property, Forrest insisted on scouting ahead to ensure no unwelcome visitors awaited them. Finding everything in order, they settled into the evening chores with the practiced rhythm they'd quickly established. After a quiet supper, they sat on the porch watching the last light fade from the sky. The day's events had left them both drained but resolute. Jenkins comes tomorrow about the timber, Winona said, breaking a long silence, and we need to approach the bank about extending the loan. One step at a time, Forrest replied. Jenkins first, then the bank. He hesitated before adding, I've been thinking about your cattle situation. Those 28 head you have left, are they all accounted for? She looked at him curiously. Yes, why? Some might have strayed into the higher pastures during the drought, seeking better grazing. It happens more often than people realize. Understanding dawned in her eyes. You think we should search the North Range? It wouldn't hurt, he suggested. I could ride up there tomorrow after Jenkins leaves. If we find even a few more head, it strengthens our position with the bank. I'll come with you, she decided. I know those pastures better than anyone. As darkness settled completely around them, neither seemed inclined to end the quiet moment they were sharing. Stars appeared one by one in the vast Colorado sky, the familiar constellations that had guided travelers and dreamers for centuries. My father used to say that as long as the stars remained fixed in their places, a person could never truly be lost, Winona said softly, her gaze lifted to the heavens. Just temporarily misplaced. Wise man, Forrest commented. My father had a similar saying that a man's character should be as reliable as the North Star, unchanging regardless of the storms around it. Winona turned to study his profile in the dim light. Is that why you keep your promises, Forrest Tanner? To honor your father's wisdom? Partly, he admitted, but mostly because life has taught me that words are meaningless without actions to support them. He met her gaze directly. Your brother might have meant well with his promises, but intentions don't pay debts or rebuild barns. No, she agreed sadly. They don't. I'm not saying this to cause you pain, he added gently, just to explain why I believe in showing rather than telling. And you've certainly shown your commitment these past days, she acknowledged. I don't know how to thank you properly. You don't need to thank me, he replied. Just keep fighting for what matters to you. That's payment enough. Something in his tone made her heart quicken unexpectedly. In the brief time she'd known him, Forrest Tanner had revealed himself to be a man of remarkable depth, strong yet gentle, determined yet thoughtful. He'd ridden into her life when she'd needed help most, asking nothing in return but the chance to work for what he believed in. It's getting late, she said finally, rising from her chair. Tomorrow will be a busy day. Indeed it will, he agreed, standing as well. Just before she entered the house, Winona paused, turning back to him. Forrest? Yes, I'm glad you're here, she said simply, then disappeared inside before he could respond. Forrest remained on the porch for a long time afterward, his thoughts as vast and complex as the star-filled sky above him. Jenkins arrived mid-morning, a practical businessman with a shrewd eye for timber. He spent several hours with Forrest and Winona examining the pine forest, measuring trees and making calculations in a small leather notebook. By early afternoon, he was ready to discuss terms. It's good timber, he confirmed as they sat at Winona's kitchen table. Not the largest stand I've seen, but healthy and accessible. I can offer you $800 for selective cutting rights. Winona's eyes widened at the figure, far more than she had anticipated. That's very generous, Mr. Jenkins. It's fair, he corrected matter-of-factly. Good pine brings good prices, especially with the railroad expansion. I'll need a contract, of course, specifying which trees can be harvested and which must remain. Of course, she agreed quickly. When could you make payment, half now as good faith, half when cutting begins next week? Jenkins reached into his coat and produced a stack of bills, counting out $400 onto the table. I'll have the contracts drawn up by tomorrow. After Jenkins departed, Winona stared at the money on the table with a mixture of disbelief and relief. This is enough to make the partial payment to the bank, she breathed. If they agree to extend the terms. They will, Forrest assured her. $800 plus the promise of future income from improved cattle stock gives them ample reason to work with you rather than foreclose. Thanks to you, she said, looking up at him with genuine gratitude. None of this would have happened without your help. You're doing the hard part, he countered, standing your ground when it would be easier to give up. She carefully secured the money in a hidden compartment of her father's desk, then turned to Forrest with renewed energy. Shall we check the north pastures now? We have a few hours of daylight left. The north range of Tucker Creek Ranch extended into the foothills, a rugged but beautiful landscape of scattered pine groves and meadows watered by small tributaries of the main creek. They rode steadily upward, following game trails that wound through increasingly remote terrain. Father used to talk about bringing the herd up here during summer drought. Winona explained as they reached a particularly lovely meadow bordered by aspen trees just beginning to turn golden. But he worried about predators and the difficulty of moving the cattle back down when needed. "It's ideal grazing," Forrest observed, noting the thick grass and plentiful water. "Cattle with any sense would find their way here during dry spells." They separated to cover more ground, agreeing to signal with a gunshot if either found strays. Forrest headed east along a ridge while Winona followed the creek upstream. The afternoon light slanted through the trees, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor as Forrest methodically searched for signs of cattle. An hour into his search, he discovered fresh droppings and hoof prints leading toward a sheltered valley beyond the ridge. Following the trail carefully, he was rewarded with the sight of a small group of cattle 7 head, all bearing the Tucker brand grazing peacefully in a meadow ringed by protective rock formations. His signal shot brought Winona within 15 minutes, her face lighting with joy at the discovery. "They survived," she exclaimed, recognizing several of the animals. "That black heifer was one of Father's favorites. He called her Midnight." 7 more head, Forrest calculated, plus the 35 you have now, including our new purchases. That's a respectable small herd to build from. They were preparing to begin moving the cattle down to the main ranch when Forrest suddenly stiffened, his hand moving to his rifle. "Someone's coming," he murmured, nodding toward movement in the trees to their west. Winona reached for her own rifle, her expression hardening. "Rayburn." Before Forrest could answer, 3 riders emerged from the trees. Not the Rayburn brothers, but rough-looking men Winona didn't recognize. They pulled up short when they spotted Forrest and Winona, clearly surprised by their presence. "This is Tucker land," Winona called out firmly. "State your business." The lead rider, a swarthy man with a pockmarked face, exchanged glances with his companions before answering. "Just passing through, madam, heading to Silverton." "You're a good 10 miles off the main trail to Silverton," Forrest observed calmly, though his stance remained alert, his rifle ready. "Got turned around," the man claimed with an unconvincing shrug. His eyes kept darting to the cattle, then back to Forrest and Winona. Understanding dawned. "You're rustlers," Winona stated flatly. The accusation hung in the air for a tense moment before the leader dropped all pretense. "Now look here," he said, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "We don't want trouble. Just found some strays, thought we'd help ourselves since nobody seemed to be claiming them." "They're claimed," Forrest replied evenly, "and branded. You're trespassing and attempting theft." The standoff stretched for several uncomfortable seconds, the rustlers clearly calculating their odds. 3 against 2, but Forrest's steady aim and unwavering stance suggested he was no amateur with firearms. Finally, the leader raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "No need for bloodshed over a few scraggly beeves. We'll ride on." "You'll ride straight to Sheriff Donovan in Durango," Forrest countered. "Winona, do you recognize any of these men from town?" She studied them carefully before shaking her head. "No, they're not locals." "Then perhaps they're working for someone local," Forrest suggested meaningfully. "Someone who benefits from cattle disappearing from Tucker Ranch." The leader's expression flickered with something like alarm. "We don't work for nobody," he insisted quickly. "We're independent businessmen, you might say." "I might say thieves," Forrest corrected. "And I'm curious why independent thieves would target such a remote location, unless they had information about these particular strays." The men exchanged nervous glances, confirming Forrest's suspicions. Someone had directed them here, someone who knew about the isolated cattle. "Here's what happens now," Forrest continued, his voice hardening. "You 3 are going to help us drive these cattle back to the main ranch. Then you're going to tell Sheriff Donovan exactly who sent you to Tucker Land. And if we refuse, the leader challenged, though with noticeably less bravado. Then we'll see if my aim is as good as I think it is, Forrest replied mildly. Starting with your gun hand. Faced with Forrest's unwavering resolve, the rustlers grudgingly agreed to help move the cattle. The journey down from the north pasture was tense, with Winona and Forrest maintaining vigilant watch over their reluctant assistants. By sunset, they had reached the main ranch and secured the recovered cattle in the corral with the others. What now? Winona asked quietly as they watched the rustlers from the porch. Do we really take them to Donovan? He's more likely to let them go than listen to accusations against Rayburn. Forrest considered this dilemma. You're probably right. But we need to establish consequences for trespassing on your land. He studied the increasingly nervous men for a moment longer before making a decision. We'll offer them a choice: face the sheriff or carry a message to their employer. The rustlers predictably chose the latter option when Forrest presented the alternatives. Tell Rayburn, Forrest instructed the leader, that Tucker Creek Ranch is now under new protection. Any further attempts to intimidate Miss Tucker or damage her property will be met with immediate and proportional response. Is that clear, Crystal? The man muttered, clearly eager to depart. One more thing, Forrest added as they mounted their horses. I've made note of your faces. If you're seen anywhere near this property again, I won't bother with warnings. After the rustlers had galloped away into the gathering darkness, Winona turned to Forrest with a mixture of admiration and concern. You've just declared war on Victor Rayburn. Not war, he corrected. Just boundaries. Every bully needs to learn them eventually. The following morning, they rode into Durango together to meet with the bank manager. The $400 from Jenkins, combined with their increased cattle count and the promise of future timber income, proved persuasive. After an hour of negotiations, the bank agreed to extend the loan deadline by 6 months, with restructured payment terms that Winona could reasonably meet. Congratulations, Miss Tucker, the manager said as they concluded the paperwork. It seems your fortunes have improved considerably in recent days. Yes, she agreed, unable to contain her smile of relief. They certainly have. As they exited the bank into the bright autumn sunshine, Winona impulsively caught Forrest's hand, squeezing it with heartfelt gratitude. We did it, she breathed. The ranch is safe. For now, he cautioned, though he returned her smile. We still have work to do. The weeks that followed brought a steady rhythm of productive activity to Tucker Creek Ranch. Jenkins' men began the selective timber harvesting, operating under Forrest's watchful supervision to ensure they adhered to the agreed terms. The remaining payment for the timber rights arrived as promised, providing capital to begin rebuilding the barn. Forrest proved as skilled in construction as he was in cattle management, directing the work with quiet efficiency. Local men were hired for the heavy labor, and by the first snowfall of early November, a new barn stood in place of the burned structure, slightly smaller but sturdier, with improved design for both safety and function. Throughout these weeks, Rayburn maintained a conspicuous distance, though occasional reports from neighbors suggested he was far from accepting defeat. The rustlers had evidently delivered Forrest's message, however, as no further incidents occurred on Tucker property. As winter settled over Colorado, transforming the landscape into a pristine wonderland of white, life at the ranch settled into comfortable routine. The cattle, including the new purchases and recovered strays, were thriving under careful management. Plans were laid for spring planting and expanded operations when weather permitted. What had begun as a temporary arrangement between Forrest and Winona had evolved into something neither had anticipated. His promise to help had been fulfilled many times over, yet he remained, becoming an essential part of the ranch's operation and increasingly of Winona's life itself. They rarely spoke of this evolution directly, though the signs were evident in 100 small ways. The lingering glances across the supper table, the way their hands occasionally brushed while working side by side, the comfortable silences they shared during evening hours by the fire. On a particularly cold December evening, as snow fell gently outside the windows, they sat in the warm kitchen after dinner. Forrest was mending a bridle while Winona reviewed the ranch accounts, a task that now brought satisfaction rather than dread. "The last payment to the bank cleared," she announced, looking up from her ledger with a smile. "And we still have enough reserve for winter supplies and spring seed." "Good," Forrest nodded approvingly. Jenkins mentioned he might be interested in another limited timber harvest next autumn if this one works out well for all concerned. "The ranch hasn't been this financially stable since before Father took ill," Winona acknowledged, closing the ledger. "I couldn't have done this without you, Forrest." He set aside the bridle, meeting her gaze directly. "You'd have found a way. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but I'm glad I didn't have to do it alone." She hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered unspoken between them for weeks. "How long do you plan to stay?" The directness of her query seemed to catch him slightly off guard. He considered his response carefully before answering. "I hadn't set a particular time frame." "That's not really an answer," she observed quietly. "No," he agreed with a faint smile. "It isn't." He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. "Truth is, Winona, I haven't thought much about leaving, not lately." Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. "Why is that?" "You know why," he replied simply. The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, driving snow against the windows in soft patterns. "When you first came," Winona said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "you said you'd keep all the promises my brother couldn't." Forrest nodded, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "You've done that," she continued. "The ranch is saved, the bank is satisfied, we even recovered some of the lost cattle. You've fulfilled your word completely." "Not completely," he corrected gently. "What do you mean?" He rose from his chair and moved around the table to stand beside her. "There was an implied promise in what I said that day that I wouldn't leave you to face your challenges alone, not just temporarily, but for as long as you wanted me here." Winona stood as well, suddenly very aware of his proximity. "And if I wanted you to stay, indefinitely?" Instead of answering with words, Forrest reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wished. When she didn't move, he gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. "I've spent 5 years drifting from place to place," he said softly. "Never staying long enough to put down roots, never allowing myself to care too deeply about anyone or anything. It seemed safer that way after losing everything once before. And now," Winona's voice trembled slightly, her eyes searching his. "Now I find myself wanting things I'd convinced myself I didn't need anymore," he admitted. "A home, purpose, someone to build a future with." Her heart soared at his words, yet caution made her hesitate. "Forrest, I need to know this isn't just gratitude or obligation making you say these things." "It's neither," he assured her firmly. "What I feel for you has nothing to do with promises or debts." His hand moved to gently cup her face. "I love you, Winona Tucker. I think I've been falling in love with you since that first day in the Wells Fargo office when you stood your ground against impossible odds." Tears filled her eyes at his declaration. "I've been so afraid to admit how I feel," she confessed. After William's broken promises, after nearly losing everything, I was terrified to trust anyone again, especially with my heart. I understand, he said gently, and I'll wait as long as you need me to. There's no rush. But Winona shook her head, a smile breaking through her tears. I don't need more time. I know what I want. She stepped closer, eliminating the small distance between them. I love you too, Forrest Tanner, and I want you to stay not as my hired hand or my rescuer, but as my partner in everything. His smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitary wandering in an instant. With infinite tenderness, he lowered his lips to hers in their first kiss, gentle at first, then deepening as she responded with equal passion. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Forrest rested his forehead against hers. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life, he whispered. And that's one promise I will never break. I believe you, Winona replied, and realized with wonderful certainty that she truly did. Spring came early to Durango in 1884, the snow melting to reveal tender green shoots pushing through the awakening earth. At Tucker Creek Ranch, the transformation went beyond the seasonal renewal of the landscape. The property itself seemed to reflect the happiness of its owners, with freshly painted buildings, expanded corrals, and new fencing defining boundaries that were now respected by all neighbors, even Victor Rayburn, who had finally accepted defeat after an enlightening conversation with Forrest that winter. The wedding was held on the first truly warm day of May, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and the creek running full and clear with snowmelt. Friends and neighbors gathered in front of the ranch house, which had been decorated with ribbons and more flowers by the women of nearby homesteads. Judge Patterson from Durango officiated, his solemn dignity occasionally cracking into smiles at the obvious happiness of the couple before him. Winona wore her mother's lace-trimmed dress, lovingly altered and updated, with her copper hair crowned by a wreath of mountain bluebells. Forrest, almost unrecognizable in a new black suit, couldn't take his eyes off her throughout the entire ceremony. By the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, the judge pronounced finally, I now declare you husband and wife. Mr. Tanner, you may kiss your bride. Forrest needed no further invitation, gathering Winona into a kiss that prompted cheers and good-natured laughter from their guests. The celebration continued well into the evening, with music from local fiddlers, tables laden with food contributed by neighbors, and more than a few toasts to the couple's happiness. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the yard where couples danced beneath the stars. During a brief moment alone, Forrest led Winona away from the festivities to the quiet of the porch steps where they had shared so many conversations. "Happy, Mrs. Tanner?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "Completely," she affirmed, leaning against his shoulder. "I never imagined life could feel this full. It's just beginning," he promised, kissing her temple. "We have everything we need right here, land that's truly ours now, good water, healthy cattle, each other." "And a letter from William," Winona added, a hint of old pain in her voice. William's telegram of congratulations had arrived that morning, along with a modest wedding gift. While Winona had responded graciously, the wounds of his broken promises had not entirely healed. Forrest understood this lingering hurt. "Perhaps someday he'll visit," he suggested gently. "See for himself what you've built here." "Perhaps," she agreed, though without much conviction. "But I've learned that looking backward isn't nearly as rewarding as looking forward." She turned in his embrace to face him, her eyes reflecting the starlight above. "And my future is right here." "As is mine," he assured her, sealing the promise with another kiss. A year later, Tucker Creek Ranch had nearly doubled its cattle count and expanded its operations to include a small horse breeding program focused on strong, intelligent mounts suited to ranch work. Forrest's knowledge of horses had proven invaluable, attracting buyers from as far as Denver who willingly paid premium prices for Tucker-bred stock. Winona had just put the finishing touches on the nursery adjacent to their bedroom, a project she'd been working on with secretive delight for months. The cradle that Forrest had crafted from pine harvested on their own land stood ready beside a rocking chair that had belonged to her mother. Yellow curtains brightened the room, and a colorful quilt made by neighboring women awaited its tiny occupant, due to arrive in less than 2 months. She stood in the doorway, admiring her handiwork when strong arms encircled her from behind, Forrest's hands coming to rest protectively over her rounded belly. "It's perfect," he murmured, his chin resting on her shoulder as he surveyed the room. "You think he'll like it?" Winona asked, placing her hands over his. Forrest questioned with a smile in his voice. "You sound very certain." "Just a feeling," she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "A mother's intuition, perhaps." "Well, daughter or son, this child will be loved beyond measure," Forrest assured her, his expression softening as he felt a strong kick against his palm. "And already has your spirit, I see." Winona laughed. "And your stubbornness, apparently, Doctor." "Collins says he's positioned himself exactly as he pleases, regardless of what might be more comfortable for his mother." "Speaking of comfort," Forrest said with sudden concern, "you should be resting. You've been on your feet all day." "I'm perfectly fine," she protested, though she allowed him to guide her to the bedroom where she settled onto the edge of their large bed. "I'm not an invalid, Forrest. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "And husbands have been worrying just as long," he countered, sitting beside her. "Humor me." She smiled at his protective nature, which had only intensified with her pregnancy. "Very well for a little while, but only because I have news that might interest you." "Oh." He raised an eyebrow curiously. "A letter came while you were checking the north pasture," she explained. "From William." Forrest's expression turned cautious. William's correspondence had been sporadic over the past year and often brought Winona more disappointment than joy. "What does he say?" To his surprise, Winona's face lit with genuine happiness. "He's coming to visit. Next month, he says, though that might be cutting it close with the baby." "That's unexpected," Forrest commented carefully. "Are you pleased?" "I am," she confirmed. "Whatever his failings, he is my brother, this child's uncle," and his letter seemed different somehow, more honest. She retrieved the folded paper from her pocket and handed it to him. "See for yourself." Forrest read the letter slowly, noting the different tone from William's previous communications. Gone were the grandiose promises and vague excuses, replaced by straightforward acknowledgement of past failures and a simple request to reconnect with his only sister and meet her husband. "He sounds sincere," Forrest conceded, returning the letter. "I think he is," Winona said softly. "People can change, can't they? Learn from their mistakes." "Some can," Forrest agreed, drawing her close, "when properly motivated." William Tucker arrived in Durango on a warm June afternoon, 3 weeks earlier than expected, and just 1 day after his nephew entered the world. He stepped off the stagecoach looking nothing like the fancy Boston businessman Winona had imagined. His clothes were simple, his face tanned from outdoor exposure, and his manner unexpectedly humble as he approached the ranch house where Forrest waited on the porch. "Mr. Tanner," he greeted hesitantly, extending his hand. "I'm William Tucker. I hope my early arrival isn't an inconvenience." Forrest studied the younger man carefully before accepting the handshake. At 30, William shared his sister's copper hair and green eyes, though his features showed signs of hardship that hadn't been earned through honest labor. "Your timing is either very poor or very fortunate, depending on how you look at it," Forrest replied, his expression neutral. "Your sister gave birth yesterday. Both she and your nephew are doing well." William's face registered shock followed by something like wonder. "A boy, I'm an uncle to a healthy son," Forrest confirmed, his pride evident despite his reserved manner with William. "They're resting now." "Of course," William nodded quickly. "I wouldn't dream of disturbing them. I can find accommodation in town until—" "That won't be necessary," Forrest interrupted, his tone softening slightly. "There's a room prepared for you. Winona has been expecting your visit for weeks." Relief washed over William's face. "Thank you, that's very generous considering your history of broken promises." Forrest finished frankly. William flushed but didn't attempt to defend himself. "Yes, exactly that. Your sister has a forgiving heart," Forrest stated simply. "I'm still forming my opinion." The honesty of this response seemed to earn William's respect. "That's fair," he acknowledged. "I have a lot to make up for." "Yes, you do," Forrest agreed, then gestured toward the door. "Come inside. You can meet your nephew when Winona wakes." Later that evening, Winona sat propped against pillows in the bed she shared with Forrest, their newborn son cradled in her arms. Her face, though showing signs of the exhaustion that accompanied childbirth, glowed with happiness as she watched her brother tentatively approach. "He's beautiful, Winona," William said softly, staring in awe at the tiny face partially visible among the blankets. "What's his name?" "Daniel," she answered, smiling up at Forrest, who stood protectively beside the bed. "Daniel James Tanner, after both our fathers." William's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Father would be so proud of you, of all you've accomplished here." "Would you like to hold him?" Winona offered, extending the bundle toward her brother. With visible nervousness, William accepted his nephew, his expression transforming as the baby briefly opened his eyes, revealing hints of the Tucker green. "Hello, Daniel," he whispered. "I'm your Uncle William. I've traveled a very long way to meet you." The moment was tender enough to soften even Forrest's lingering reservations. He placed a gentle hand on Winona's shoulder, exchanging a look of understanding with his wife, as they witnessed this first meeting between William and his nephew. Later, after Winona had fallen asleep and the baby was settled in his cradle, Forrest found William on the porch, staring out at the ranch bathed in moonlight. "It's more beautiful than I remembered," William said as Forrest joined him. "Bigger, too." "We've expanded the property," Forrest explained, leaning against the railing. "Bought the Henderson place to the south when it came up for sale last fall." William nodded appreciatively. "Winona always loved this land more than I did. I was always looking toward the horizon, thinking something better must lie just out of sight." "And did you find it?" Forrest asked without judgment. A rueful smile crossed William's face. "Not exactly. Found a lot of things, some good, many not, made money, lost it, made promises." His voice trailed off and broke them, Forrest finished for him. "Yes," William acknowledged quietly. "I've been running from that truth for years, telling myself that intentions matter more than actions." He looked directly at Forrest. "But they don't, do they?" "No," Forrest confirmed. "They don't. I want to make amends," William said with sudden intensity. "Not just words this time, real amends." Forrest studied him thoughtfully before responding. "Start by being honest with Winona, with yourself. No more promises you can't keep." "I can do that," William affirmed. "Then welcome home," Forrest said simply. Offering his hand once more over the following weeks, William proved his sincerity through actions rather than words. He worked alongside Forrest from dawn till dusk, learning the ranch operations he had once been so eager to escape. Though initially awkward with physical labor, He applied himself with determination that gradually earned the respect of both Forrest and the handful of men they employed. With Winona, he rebuilt their relationship conversation by conversation, acknowledging his failures without excuse while sharing stories of his years away. The bitterness she had harbored slowly dissolved, replaced by a cautious but genuine reconnection with her only blood relative. In the evenings, William devoted himself to his nephew, clearly enchanted by the tiny boy whose personality emerged a little more each day. Daniel seemed equally fascinated by his uncle, staring intently at William's face whenever he spoke and eventually rewarding him with early smiles that William treasured like precious gifts. As July turned to August and Daniel grew stronger and more alert, William approached Forrest with a proposal. They were mending fences in the east pasture, a job that had become easier as William's hands toughened and his skills improved. "I've been thinking," William began, hammering a staple into the post with newfound confidence, "about my future." Forrest paused in his work, giving William his full attention. "What about it?" "I'm not going back to Boston," William stated firmly. "There's nothing for me there but memories of failure and false starts." "Have you told Winona?" William nodded. "Last night. She seemed pleased but said the decision needed to be practical, not emotional." "She's right," Forrest agreed. "What will you do instead?" "That's what I wanted to discuss with you." William set down his hammer, facing Forrest directly. "The Henderson property you purchased, it has that small house that needs renovation." "It does," Forrest confirmed, beginning to understand where this was heading. "I'd like to fix it up, make it livable," William continued. "Work for you and Winona properly, earn my place here." He hesitated before adding, "I have some savings left, not much but enough to contribute to the ranch operations in a meaningful way." Forrest considered the proposal carefully. The small house on the Henderson property had indeed been part of their expansion plans, potentially as housing for a foreman as the ranch continued to grow. William's suggestion made practical sense, but Forrest's primary concern was Winona's happiness and security. "This isn't a decision I can make alone," he said finally. "Winona and I are partners in every sense. We'll discuss it together." "Of course," William agreed quickly. "I wouldn't want it any other way." That evening, after Daniel had been settled for the night in his cradle, the three adults sat at the kitchen table discussing William's proposal. Winona listened intently as her brother outlined his plans, asking pointed questions about his financial situation and long-term intentions. "I'm not asking for ownership," William clarified. "Just the opportunity to earn my place here, to be part of something meaningful again, to be near my sister and her family." His voice softened on the last words, revealing the depth of emotion behind his practical request. Winona looked to Forrest, a silent communication passing between them after months of marriage and partnership. He gave a slight nod, indicating his support for whatever she decided. "The Henderson house needs a new roof," she said finally, "and the well requires cleaning and repair." William blinked, momentarily confused by this apparent non sequitur. "Yes, I noticed that. If you're serious about staying, those would be your first priorities," she continued, a smile beginning to form. "Before winter comes." Understanding dawned on William's face. "Does that mean?" "It means we're willing to give this arrangement a trial period," Forrest clarified. 6 months to see if it works for everyone involved. "With clear expectations and responsibilities," Winona added firmly. "Of course," William agreed eagerly. "I won't let you down, either of you." "We'll hold you to that," Forrest stated, though his tone had lost its earlier caution. "But I believe you mean it this time." The following spring brought renewed growth to Tucker Creek Ranch, not just in the expanding herds and cultivated fields, but in the human connections that defined its heart. The Henderson house, now fully renovated under William's diligent care, stood as a testament to his commitment to his new life. The 6-month trial period had passed successfully, with William proving himself a valuable addition to the ranch operations. Daniel, nearly a year old now, had grown into a sturdy, curious boy with Winona's copper hair and Forrest's thoughtful blue eyes. He divided his time between exploring the world under his parents' watchful eyes and being thoroughly spoiled by his devoted uncle. As Winona watched her son taking tentative steps across the yard, steadied by Forrest's strong hands, she reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. From the brink of losing everything to the abundant life she now enjoyed, it seemed almost miraculous. "Penny for your thoughts," William said, joining her on the porch where she sat shelling peas. "Just counting my blessings," she replied with a smile, making room for him on the bench. "They've multiplied considerably since that day in the Wells Fargo office." William's expression grew more serious. "I've been meaning to say something to you but never quite found the right moment." "What is it?" she asked, setting aside her bowl of peas. "Thank you," he said simply, "for giving me another chance when I'd given you every reason not to. For allowing me to be part of your family after I failed you so completely." Winona reached for her brother's hand. "Family is family, William, even when they break promises." "Some promises can't be mended," he acknowledged quietly, "but I'm grateful that relationships can be." Across the yard, Forrest scooped Daniel into his arms as the boy squealed with delight, his laughter carrying on the spring breeze. Noticing Winona and William on the porch, he headed toward them, Daniel perched securely on his shoulders. "This young man has decided he's ready to help with the horses," Forrest announced with mock seriousness as he reached the porch steps. "I told him he might need to grow a few more inches first." "At least a few," Winona agreed, reaching up to tickle her son's foot. "Though he certainly has his father's determination." "And his mother's stubbornness," Forrest added with a wink, transferring Daniel to Winona's waiting arms. As the family shared this moment of simple happiness, a rider appeared at the far end of the drive, approaching at a steady pace. Forrest straightened, shading his eyes to identify the visitor. "It's Jenkins," he reported, recognizing the sawmill owner. "Probably here about the fall timber contract." "I'll take care of Daniel while you both meet with him," William offered, accepting his nephew from Winona's arms. "We have important castle building to attend to, don't we, young man?" Daniel responded with enthusiastic babbling as William carried him into the house, leaving Forrest and Winona to greet their visitor. Jenkins dismounted in the yard, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Mr. and Mrs. Tanner," he called cheerfully. "Fine day for a ride." "Indeed it is," Forrest agreed, descending the steps to shake the man's hand. "What brings you out our way?" "Business and pleasure," Jenkins replied. "Wanted to discuss this year's timber harvest, of course, but also to deliver some news you might find interesting." "Come up to the porch," Winona invited. "I'll fetch some coffee." Once they were settled with steaming cups, Jenkins shared his news. "Rayburn's selling out," he announced without preamble. "Lock, stock, and barrel, moving to California from what I hear." Forrest and Winona exchanged surprised glances. Victor Rayburn had maintained a cold distance since their confrontation, but his departure was unexpected. "Did he say why?" Forrest asked. Jenkins chuckled. "Not in so many words, but rumor has it he's tired of being outmaneuvered by his neighbors." He nodded meaningfully toward them. "His cattle operation has been losing ground to yours for months now, especially since that new breeding program you started is producing such fine stock." "I can't say I'm sorry to see him go," Winona admitted, "though I never wished him ill." "Well, his property will be up for auction next month," Jenkins continued. "Prime land, especially that section that borders your north pasture." The implication was clear. With Rayburn gone, Tucker Creek Ranch could potentially expand further, securing additional water rights and grazing land that would enhance their already successful operation. After Jenkins departed, having concluded the timber negotiations satisfactorily, Forrest and Winona walked hand in hand toward the corral where their prized horses grazed in the afternoon sun. The possibility of acquiring Rayburn's adjoining land opened new horizons for their future. "What do you think?" Forrest asked as they leaned against the fence, watching a mare and her new foal. "It would be a significant investment, but the bank would likely support it given our track record." Winona considered the question seriously. "The additional acreage would allow us to increase the herd substantially," she acknowledged, "and securing those water rights would protect us against future droughts." "But," Forrest prompted, sensing her hesitation, "but I don't want to expand just for the sake of expansion," she explained. "Whatever we build here needs to have purpose beyond mere profit." Forrest nodded in understanding. "A legacy for Daniel, and perhaps other children someday." A soft smile played at Winona's lips. "Perhaps sooner than someday," she said quietly, placing their joined hands against her stomach in a gesture whose meaning couldn't be mistaken. Forrest's expression transformed with wonder. "Are you certain?" "Dr. Collins confirmed it yesterday," she affirmed, her eyes bright with happiness. "Early next winter, if all goes well." With gentle reverence, Forrest gathered her into his arms, his joy too profound for words in that moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I once promised to keep every vow your brother couldn't. I never imagined how completely that promise would change my life." "Our lives," Winona corrected softly. "All of our lives." As they stood together in the golden Colorado afternoon, the ranch stretching out around them like a fulfilled promise, Forrest reflected on the strange and wonderful paths that had led him to this moment. From lonely drifter to husband, father, and steward of this thriving land, it was a transformation he could never have envisioned that day in the Wells Fargo office. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "your brother William has proven that people can change, that past failures don't have to define the future." "Yes," Winona agreed, "when they truly want to change." "Rayburn's departure marks the end of an era for this valley," Forrest continued. "Perhaps it's fitting that, as one chapter closes, another begins." He placed his hand protectively over hers where it rested against her still flat stomach. "Our family grows as our legacy deepens." That evening, as the extended family gathered around the dinner table, Forrest and Winona, William, little Daniel in his high chair, and two ranch hands who had become like family themselves, Winona shared the news of her pregnancy. The joyful reactions, especially William's unabashed tears of happiness, confirmed what she had known in her heart since Forrest Tanner had ridden into her life. That promises kept were the foundation upon which true happiness was built. Later, as they stood on the porch beneath a canopy of stars, Forrest wrapped his arms around his wife from behind, both of them gazing out at the land that had united them. "Every promise I've ever made to you," he murmured against her hair, "I intend to keep for the rest of our lives." "I know," Winona replied simply, leaning back against his strength. "That's why I trusted you with my heart in the first place." As the years would prove, it was a trust well placed in the man who had vowed to keep every promise that had been broken, and in doing so, had helped build a legacy of love and fulfillment that would endure for generations to come at Tucker Creek Ranch.